The gloomy boy once found himself in a cemetery, surrounded by the dark air that often accompanied such a somber environment. Then, his father had told him to listen closely. In the great house of Marbas, he asked the child what entity that they held with the highest regard. The answer was simple, of course. The noble house was the kind that idolized death itself. This was because they were a clan of necromancers, with dominion over the undead. Due to this, the noble family had to revere death itself with the highest of regard. The young boy pondered his father's words and then asked what on earth that meant. How was it possible for them to revere death? He thought that necromancers were the kind to take lives whether they wanted to or not. After all, they had to gain more power as dark mages. The boy's father smiled. His green eyes filled with kindness as he noted that his dear son had been studying their family history. Yes, it was true that they were a family of dark mages that were feared by countless people across the continent. However, that did not mean that they had to become heartless villains themselves. That is why the kind father made his son promise him one thing. No matter who Leon faced in battle one day, as long as he held dominion of life or death over them, then Leon had to swear that he would make their end as peaceful as he could. The boy with the empty eyes regarded his father, and he wondered now if his father would still want him to keep his word for every foe that he faced. Now, the boy faced goblins in a dark underground passageway, their shameless lust apparent in the woman that they held captive. Without hesitation, the young noble had cut down one of their numbers and he stared emptily as he was surrounded by the next challengers. His foes held no mourning for their fallen comrade, wicked grins stretching out on their sick and twisted lips, each sure that they could best the young boy. The fallen goblin bled red at the young lad's feet, and he had to ensure to aim for the cervical vertebra with deadly precision. He would kill them with one strike, keeping the promise that he made to his father. There was no better way to dispatch an enemy with as little pain as possible. The little Marbas watched the young noble, noting that it did not seem as though Leon had had much practice with a sword. Yet, the boy had struck the vertebra with pinpoint accuracy. It was amazing to watch the young lad fight. The lion demon wondered if the first strike had just been a fluke, a stroke of luck, or a possible inborn gift of some sort. Grinning with glee, the demon knew that he would soon find out as many goblins made their way towards his young charge. Leon noted that he had managed to take one of them down, but that was more luck than skill. Goblins were a shrewd species and devious by nature. Their eyes glowed red with the anticipation of cutting him to pieces, and he had to keep his guard up. The boy held tightly to the handle of his weapon, bracing himself for their next attack. The darkness did make it a little difficult to judge the elevation, and not only that, but the young boy's vision could darken with each passing moment as it got later in the night. He recalled that a torch flicked out with the first goblin he slew, so he ought to acclimatize to the dark while he could and defeat a large number of foes. Then, instead of cutting through the enemy, the boy should look to pierce and dislodge as precisely as he could. Moving swiftly, the boy leapt behind yet another foe and charged at them, his eyes promising death as he descended to eradicate his foe. The weapon struck true, and yet another green enemy went down with a tortured scream of pain. Just as Leon had suspected, another torch flickered out as the zombie hit the floor. Another goblin growled with a screech, charging at Leon with surprising speed. However, the Marbas noble was ready for him and he swooshed around just in time, dodging out of the way when the goblin brought its weapon down. Two had come at him from different sides, and they met each other in the middle in vicious combat. Taking advantage of their distraction, Leon dispatched yet another goblin, slicing quickly through its throat, and yet another light went out. The boy's eyes were growing used to the dark, so he should be able to see well enough even if more torches went out. It was quite unfortunate, though, that his dagger was starting to suffer damage from his clashes with the vicious beasts. He could not expect the blade to hold up for long. After all, it was just a ceremonial blade. Suddenly, a shriek pulled the boy out of his musings. Yet another goblin came at him, weapon raised, with murder glinting in its eyes. The boy raised his defense immediately, slashing at the creature in a smooth strike that made contact with the evil creature's face. Unfortunately, the cut he made was much too shallow this time, barely more than a ridiculously small scratch. The lion demon was shocked to see Leon abandon his weapon, and the boy raced ahead as he managed to dodge his enemy's strike. The boy's eyes glinted a calculated green, and Marbas stared, impressed and excited. The young noble lunged, escaping the goblin's hit and grabbing the discarded weapon. Leon grabbed the fallen weapon of one of his opponents and faced the goblin again, this time with more vicious tenacity. The boy stomped and leapt forward, slicing at his enemy again with renewed vigor. This time the boy's slash produced better results and a waterfall of blood rained down from the goblin's guts. A quick slice left the beast in shambles, and the boy stepped back as yet another goblin dropped to the floor. Without wasting time, Leon spun. The Marbas boy had eliminated all of his enemies, and he stepped forward with pride and confidence, walking slowly towards the bound girl in the dungeons. The young lady was bound with a rope at her mouth, and she mumbled in fear. After all, she had just seen her young hero make very quick work of monsters twice her size. The boy took the rope out of her mouth, and the poor girl cried with grateful tears in her eyes. She thanked him for saving her life, her expression the picture of perfect gratitude. She spoke more on how she owed the boy so much, but the poor girl did not go far in her speech before she was then stabbed. The boy's bloody sword had pierced right through the shocked bodacious maiden. Her own hero had taken her life. The girl was speechless, staring into the empty and dark eyes of her rescuer, and he just pulled the sword out, dispatching her as quickly as he had ended the goblins. Leon stared at the girl, saying that he was reminded of yet another piece of wise counsel from his father. He had been told of monsters with the ability to mimic human beings, which his father had encountered during his travels through the continent. This was why it was so easy for him now to end the lady before him, and she fell with a guttural monstrous cry. The monster now revealed herself, growling with claws drawn as she regarded her enemy. The boy's father had also told him to never forget that those who deceived and exploited the trust of others did not deserve peaceful ends. Those kinds of people had to feel the exact same fear and despair that they pushed their victims through. And to that end, Leon's eyes beamed with dark green unfiltered malice as he thought that the demon girl could do with a little lesson in suffering. He felt she should agree. Her screams echoed through the dungeon as he got busy with her, and finally the last torch went out. There was dancing, ladies in beautiful red dresses, charming the audience with their great moves. The banquet hall was packed with drinks and cups, with Leon's uncle at the center of it all, laughing it up in glee because his evil plans were finally coming into fruition. It would not be long before the accursed house was firmly within his grasp, and he celebrated by having his arm in very suggestive positions around two babes. The babes encouraged drunkenness and partying since they wanted his money anyway. A distinguished gentleman like him had to be the head of the household over a baby-faced boy. That made so much more sense after all. The other lady agreed, saying that Sir Kirchel was nothing short of incredible. She never could have imagined that he would use the Sylvesters to get his way. That evil backstabbing cretin had cut a deal with the enemy house to rise to the top. The girls cooked and fed the man's ego, saying that it took a real man to be a backstabbing jerk. The man laughed, buying the flattery, saying that he had to bow and scrape to the Sylvester scum. However, he never had to worry about that anymore, and he happily gulped down a jug full of wine. Bowing and scraping was by far the lesser of two evils when compared to his nephew, whom he called a wet whelp. The man was sure that his nephew would drag House Marbas down a path to extinction. Indeed, it would be 100 times more preferable if he took power instead. After all, who was there who could deny that the man had played this game flawlessly, and he had won? The wicked creature laughed darkly, and all those around him laughed as well, especially that slick-back moron that agreed with him in the first place. Speaking of Slick Hair, he wanted to know what happened to Leon. The boy had wandered off, and Slick Hair wanted to know the plan for disposing of the young patriarch. The people of the estate were deeply loyal to the boy's father, so it would be a little difficult to get rid of the little brat. However, the uncle was mostly unbothered, and he felt that matters did not need to get complicated at all. Smirking wickedly, the old man revealed his plan, saying that the boy's demise would be justified after the fact. After all, dead men tell no tales, and neither do their sons. Slick Hair thought this was well said, and he supposed that the last time anyone heard from the dead was centuries ago when the founding Marbas patriarch had wielded the power of necromancy. More drink was poured, golden and beautiful as the men continued to laugh and celebrate their wickedness. They made a toast to their next and rightful patriarch of the Marbas house, Sir Kirchel. There was laughter and heavy levels of mad drunkenness. The enjoyment went on with the girls dancing suggestively in the background as the wicked men giggled with their girls by their side. Meanwhile, back in a very important house, the patriarch of House Sylvester wanted to be sure that his plan to subjugate House Marbas was progressing as planned. His associates, of course, gave him the relief that he wanted to hear. The Grey Eminence, Kirchel von Marbas, was essentially nothing more than a pawn in their employ. They only needed to wait for the official approval for all-out warfare from the imperial household. The wicked man smirked, laughing at the incorrigible fools that were playing into his hands. They were rather dim to presume that the Sylvester patriarch would hold off on the second course of war as if it had not been long since the first. It created a rather convenient opening for the wicked blonde man. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the Lord's remarkable strategic foresight. The Lord of Sylvester took note of the files that they had no Kirchel. To think that the centuries-long history of House Marbas would come to an end at the hands of some short-sighted dunce of a traitor. It was truly pitiful. Still, the Sylvester noble smiled as he dreamed of the night of delights. He told his men to hasten their preparation at once. Nothing would get in the way of his perfect victory. First, he killed the father, and now the man eagerly looked forward to delighting in the death of the son. The wicked man could scarcely wait to hear the sweet sound of their cries of peril. Meanwhile, the son in question had just successfully eliminated the last of the monsters that he found within the underground. His blade spilled blood on the floor as he pulled it from the body of his latest victim, and those green eyes adjusted to the pitch darkness that now surrounded him with the torches snuffed out. The girl seemed to be the last of the monsters in there. Suddenly, there was a bright flash of light and the entire underground area instantly became illuminated. The boy stared at the fire that now crackled and popped in its stand, and he ran his fingers through his hair in part exhaustion and part awe. Marbas thought that the young lad was incredible. The kitten pounced with joy as he was yet to meet such a deranged contractor in all of his existence. The demon found absolute delight in how insane Leon was turning out to be. The boy was shocked and found himself knocked right into a pool of blood. losing his weapon and everything, as he did not want to hurt Marbas. The happy demon felt like his new charge surely possessed enough grit to survive in a camp full of orcs since he was so good at keeping his wits about him. Tiny paw pads happily kneaded Leon's face, and the boy just stared emptily as usual, probably wishing that he was not sloshing about in blood. Marbas continued to laugh and praise him, somehow figuring out the demon in disguise as a human, and how the boy had not hesitated to run it through with a sword. Leon finally rose, saying that he would prefer to avoid any run-ins with orcs if at all possible. Then he gently set down his new kitten on the floor. The boy knew all about how orcs despised humans above all else as a race. That was no matter to the demon, as he wanted to know why Leon had known to suspect that the girl was in cahoots with the rest. The boy fell silent as he considered the answer to that question. It was actually quite simple for him. When all the other torches had gone out, there was still one that stayed lit, which must mean that another monster remained. Yet the only one left was the girl. The demon was deeply interested in this logic, and Leon explained that when they first set foot in that place, he had realized that the torches in the area burned a different color than what they had seen thus far. The torches burned green to signify the goblins that they had to slay. Green was the shade of the dead, and sure enough, with each monster that he slew, the torches flickered out one by one. However, the boy then noticed that there was one more torch flaring bright in the color of green. So obviously there was one monster left, and the boy could not move on until it was dead, although its death had been a bit more brutal than the others. The kitten stared at the boy who sat in a pool of blood, excited by how frightfully cold-blooded his new charge was. The demon had not expected a mere boy of 14 to surmise so much under such dire circumstances. Now the boy was just looking around, taking in his blood-soaked shirt. When one's life was at stake, it could be difficult enough to read the situation, let alone spring to action without a moment's hesitation. Yet, Leon did exactly that in an instant, dispatching all the enemies by himself in the end. Perhaps there was more to the young charge than just the vast mana reserve that he contained. It could be that the young noble was hiding something truly special as well, something that even the boy did not know existed. This thought truly fascinated Marbas, and the demon smirked with joy. It was rather entertaining. He could not wait to see what the boy showed him next. Then, Marbas lifted the necromancy book. With Welland's first trial behind him, it was time for them to proceed to the next step in learning necromancy. The book's pages flipped open and then stopped on the next lesson. After taking the life of a living being, it was then time to raise the fallen. The boy stared at the book for a moment, and hummed as he understood that he had to raise the undead. There was a nice selection of corpses for him to use, freshly departed, so the boy smiled rather wickedly, eager to begin. It was time for Leon to raise the undead. The instructions were clear and pretty easy to use in theory. He was just to gaze at the goblins that he killed and then to direct his mana to his eyes to maximize his vision. The boy did just that, mana collecting in his dark green eyes as he stared at the corpses that he made. He would see on each body a threat that linked it to some unknown place, possibly the afterlife or something like that. Sure enough, the young noble turned to the corpses and he saw each string linked to them just like Marbas had explained. In the parlance of necromancers, this thread was apparently called a death line. This was the line that crossed the bounds of death and linked each soul with the thread from this world to the next. So it was apparently the thread of reincarnation. The kitten smiled at how fast his disciple was learning, and he plucked at the strings of death with ease. A necromancer separated the lingering souls of the dead from their bodies to revive their spirits, and then breathed new life into the bodies by combining the souls with the necromancer's own mana. The goblins slowly pushed to their feet as Leon commanded their reanimation as the undead. The goblins smirked wickedly as dark crosses etched onto their head. It seemed that they shared their creator's smile. Each evil goblin came alive, now bubbling with a purple aura surrounding them. Marbas then happily demonstrated to his watching disciple. The goblin lunged at Leon, who stood holding the book, and it stretched out its weapon to the boy, but of course, it did not hurt him. This process was referred to as branding. There were, of course, other means of creating undead minions, but the demon said that the sole method that worked on monsters was branding, and he would save the other methods for another time, as they were still covering the basics. The boy noted that and got to his feet. Now, the demon gave his young charge leave to try controlling the dead by himself. However, before doing any of that, Leon had a question to ask. It had been on his mind for a while. Sure enough, Marbas permitted him to proceed with his question. So, the young boy revealed that his predecessor once told him that it was far more complex to turn a human being undead than it was to turn a monster. The boy, who had only just started training, wanted to know if he had reached a level where he could turn a person undead. The beast laughed as his charge had spoken much like one that may have a need for such a feat. The kitten grinned and asked wickedly what wretch the boy wanted so badly to reanimate, and the boy with dark eyes called upon the name of Kirchel von Marbas. The man that the young boy so badly wanted to turn into a corpse was his own uncle. Meanwhile, his uncle was still somehow happily whining and dining. The man had no sense of self-preservation and was truly the kind that only liked to live in the moment. It was rather embarrassing to watch, especially for a man with so many enemies. He sat with his lackeys and wenches, giggling and getting drunk, and the girls in turn squealed and giggled along with the finished man. Kirchel laughed that the late patriarch was a fool, yet his life had been smooth sailing ever since Rune died. This was the life of a man of opportunity, and he laughed as his girls agreed with him. The man was wasted, and his senseless yes man was all too happy to agree with him. Now all that remained was to take care of the soul heir. Slick back hair was sure that Sir Kirchel must be feeling the weight lift somewhat from his shoulders, and the man scoffed, saying that murdering the boy hardly presented that much of a problem. Once again, he asked his cronies to raise their glasses and to drink their fill. There were precious few days that were as auspicious as this. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise and paused. The rumbling continued through the building, and a few things snapped as the place began to shake. Karma was coming, and the girl squealed when the chandelier came down. The old man suddenly scowled and became alert, wondering what was happening. This establishment was supposed to be the kind that could be protected by a magical artifact. It should take more than mere wind to shake the whole building. The old man then got even more serious, telling the girl beside him to be quiet. This was no normal quake. The old man yelled into the dark, asking who had come at this time. There was not a soul remaining in the Marbas territory with the gall to make an attempt against his life, and the man was unafraid. Leon could not help but ask exactly what had given his uncle such a notion. The boy appeared now, his eyes as empty as always as lightning flashed behind him. The uncle stared with amusement, foolishly unafraid of his nephew. The young patriarch of a downtrodden house was what he called him as his own men showed behind him, ready to cut Leon into pieces. The boy stared at his uncle, stared at the man who should have been family, who should have been protecting him. Then, Leon said how gracious of Kirchel to recognize his patriarch. His uncle laughed, seeing no reason why the boy would visit unannounced at such a late hour, and he asked the boy what business he had with him. Now that was truly an odd question. The young patriarch, the lord of the estate, did not require a reason to visit a subject, much less a vassal like his uncle. He did not need to announce his intentions ahead of time for his convenience. Kirchel glared, saying that he supposed any other worthy lord should have no need for such courtesies, but he thought of the young boy as far from worthy to lord over even a box of mice. The man laughed, asking if the boy was frightened that his seat as the patriarch might be taken away from him. It was entirely too late, and the boy's hapless father was no longer around to keep him safe. The man jeered and mocked and laughed at Leon, who just stared coldly at the old man. Then, Leon pushed aside the curtains that separated them, stepping into the chamber where his uncle sat. The boy said that he was not afraid now that he had the means to keep himself safe. The uncle jeered, asking the boy what his newfound wisdom told him about coming here alone. It was bold of the boy to seek out his uncle as if he had multiple lives. However, the young patriarch did not believe confronting his uncle required any manner of boldness. It was bold of the old man to assume that the young boy had come alone. The uncle now frowned, wondering what his nephew was babbling about. That is when the building rumbled once more, and the uncle looked around in shock and confusion. This was bizarre, and these shakes could not come about from some common magic. The magic that thrummed along the walls and the floors was that of the abyss, and now the old man realized that he knew this sensation, and he recognized this darkness far deeper than any mortal could know. The old man flinched, hoping that it was not what he suspected, that after years of dormancy, his worst nightmare could not possibly come true. However, that was exactly the case, and goblins stumbled into the room. The undead had come, and Leon confirmed their existence as the undead. The old man stared, pale with fright, asking how such a thing could be possible. Not even his late brother could harness such a might, talkless at a young age. The boy looked bored, saying that it should be obvious. The house Marbas was in is once more a clan of necromancers. The old man gritted his teeth in rage at this explosive level of bad luck. He yelled and pointed, asking his guards to cut down those unsightly abominations at once. The guards rushed forward to attack the undead, and the undead enemy awaited their approach. The armed men flew forward, swarming the undead with mass numbers and deadly skill, all racing to cut down the boy with the empty eyes. However, the undead got there first. The undead goblins fought to defend their master, grinning with wicked delight. The men were shocked to see the undead fighting back as they had underestimated the boy's potential. The undead did indeed fight back, and it sliced right through one of the armed men. The man toppled in a splash of blood and fell to the floor before the uncle and the rest of his guards. The old man stared in horror as he realized that he was now in some very hot soup. The goblins made quick work of the other guards, flying at great speed to dispatch the armed men. One by one, more guards fell, much to the alarm of the other guards watching, and the uncle called the boy a monster. That catches us up with episode 2 on this manhwa, which I hope you guys have enjoyed. I will now get to part 3 and start working on other scripts, so this is it from me for today. Take care, and I'll see you all in future uploads. Until next time.